Good afternoon, everyone. The special board meeting of the Santa Clarita Valley GSA Board of Directors is called to order. We begin our meetings with the Pledge of Allegiance. I'd like to ask that at this time you rise as you are able to join us in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everybody. I am this year's president, Gina Natoli from the County of Los Angeles. I'd like to go through a few announcements. First, on the procedures for today's meeting. This meeting is being conducted pursuant to the provisions of Assembly Bill 361. Board and staff, please mute all your devices until you are ready to speak to avoid feedback, echoing, and background noise. Make sure you unmute to speak and remute when finished. All board members, please turn on your cameras during the meeting. Staff, please turn on your cameras when speaking and turn them off when finished. Board members will be advised to use the raise hand feature when action and discussion items are presented, and I will call on each of you when it is your turn to speak. The public may comment on items covered on the agenda during item 1.3 or may do so at the time each item is considered. Speakers will be held to 3 minutes per comment. To participate in public comment from your computer, tablet, or smartphone, please raise your Zoom hand when I announce the agenda item you wish to speak on. You will be notified when it is your turn to speak. Please unmute when requested. To participate in public comment via phone, when I announce the agenda item you wish to speak on, dial *9 to raise your hand. Phone participants will be called on by the last 2 digits of their phone number. When it is your turn to speak, dial *6 to unmute. When you are finished with your public comment, staff will remute you. Please be familiar with the last 2 digits of your phone number. Again, that's *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. We will use the following procedure for approving items and taking public comments. I will introduce each agenda item, then ask for staff's presentation. I will then call for public comments. I will ask for questions and discussion from board members. And remember, board members, please raise your hand. The board may then ask additional questions and discuss further, including additional public comment. Once the item is concluded, I will ask for a motion and a second on action items. After any further discussion, the board secretary will call for roll call votes. Any PowerPoint presentation shown today may be viewed tomorrow on the Santa Clarita Valley GSA website. Secretary Kang, please call the roll.
When I call your name, please respond by saying present. Director Atkins?
Present.
Director Cooper?
Present.
Director Gibbs?
Present.
Director Gladback?
Present.
Director Martin?
Present.
Director Widman?
Present.
And President Natoli?
Present.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Very good. Our next item, 1.3, is public comments. Do we have anyone signed up for public comment?
We do not have public comment at this time.
Very well. Moving on to item 1.4. Approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion for approval of the agenda?
Martin moves approval.
So moved.
Martin,
Atkins, second.
I'm sorry, who was the second?
Atkins.
Thank you, Director Atkins. Any discussion? Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
When I call your name, please state your vote. Director Atkins?
Yes.
Director Cooper?
Yes.
Director Gibbs?
Yes.
Director Gladback?
Yes.
Director Martin?
Yes.
Director Widman?
Abstain.
President Natoli?
Aye.
Thank you. The agenda has approved.
Thank you. We're moving on to section 2, item 2.1, in special procedures. To approve continuation of remote meetings as described in Assembly Bill 361 and make the required findings. Councillor Bunn, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam President. This is required in the event that the board wants to continue with this meeting as a virtual meeting. AB 361 required that to be done every 30 days. Of course, it's been more than 30 days since our last meeting, but this is the first one that we've had. So what a yes vote would be here is to reaffirm the resolution to find that there's a continued state of emergency, which there is, and that Los Angeles County officials have imposed or recommended measures to promote social distancing. And therefore the board determines to go forward with virtual meetings for the next 30 days.
Thank you, Mr. Bunn. Is there any public comment on this item, Secretary Kang?
There is no public comment.
And do I have any comments from the board? Seeing none. May I have a motion for approving the item?
Gladback moves.
Atkins, second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Secretary Kang, please call the roll.
When I call your name, please state your vote. Director Atkins,
Yes.
Director Cooper,
No, I believe it's time we go back to in-person meetings.
Director Gibbs,
Yes.
Director Gladback,
Yes.
Director Martin,
Yes.
Director Whitman,
Yes.
President Natoli.
Yes,
Thank you. Item 2.1 is approved.
thank you. Item 3 is a consent calendar. The item on our consent calendar today is approval of the minutes of our October 20th, 2021 Special Board of Directors meeting. Do we have any public comment on this item?
There is no public comment.
And is there any discussion by members of the board? May I have a motion for approving the consent calendar?
So moved.
So moved,
Martin.
Atkins. Second, Atkins.
What, was that clear to you, Secretary Kang?
Yes, I have Martin and Director Atkins.
Very good, thank you. And please call the roll.
When I call your name, please state your vote. Director Atkins,
Yes.
Director Cooper,
Yes.
Director Gibbs,
Yes.
Director Gladback,
Abstain.
Director Martin,
Yes.
Director Ridman,
Abstain.
President Natoli.
Aye.
Thank you. The consent calendar item is approved.
All right, very good. We're moving on to section 4, discussion and/or action of agenda items. Item 4.1, discussion of sustainable management criteria for groundwater, surface water interactions and triggers for groundwater dependent ecosystems. Mr. Viergoots, please proceed.
Thank you, President Natoli. Good afternoon, directors. Allow me to get this up and running. Are you able to see the PowerPoint on your screen?
We see you.
Okay.
No PowerPoint.
And a nice clear whiteboard behind you.
Let's try this again. It tells me it's sharing it properly, but we'll try a different approach.
There
About
we go.
now.
There we go.
Okay, good. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. We have a couple items today, 4.1 and 4.2, that are a follow-up to our board meeting on October 20th. And this is the first of the two. We talked with your board on the 20th about the groundwater, surface water sustainability criteria. And we realized though we've done quite a bit of analysis and work, there's more we can do to explain it better to your board. And so we're here today to do that. And with me is the consultant team, Jeff Berry, John Porcello. Tom Barnes is also here. If you don't remember, Tom Barnes works for our biologic consulting firm. So I will jump in. There's also a clerical matter I want to bring to your board. There is a minor error in the section heading numbers in the attachment 3. The proper attachment number is 9.5.5, but something happened when yours truly converted it from Adobe to Microsoft Word, and Word was just a little bit too helpful in renumbering some of the sections. So let's jump in. So we want to talk to your board today about the use of the GDE evaluation process. How and when do we use it? We want to talk about timing.
Mr.
When we
Veergood,
say yes,
Mr. Veergood, could you hold for just a moment? Is it just me or does everybody else see only a portion of the PowerPoint presentation?
I see it all.
Yeah, I think I'm seeing it all too, President Tully.
Okay,
I see it.
I
Okay,
think I see it all.
go ahead and continue, Mr. Veergood. I'll see if there's something I need to do with my screen.
okay. So we want to talk about implementation of management actions. When do we do that? How long does it take for that to take place? So, and then we want to talk about changing in groundwater elevations as well. Because remember, the management actions for the GDE process, if implemented, are designed to cause the water levels to come back up. And so we're going to discuss with your board today how the timing of that works, and we'll show you some examples. We want to open the item for discussion, and we certainly want to get your board's direction on moving forward with the approach. So from a big picture perspective, the state's regulations require GSAs consider surface water depletion when we develop sustainable management criteria. We've done that. We've established minimum thresholds to avoid undesirable results related to surface water depletion. But the regulations also say, by the way, we want you to consider other factors, including groundwater dependent ecosystems. And so we're doing that too with this GDE evaluation process. Why are we doing this? We're doing it because we're required to do it by the regulations. We're also doing it because this kind of work in the Valley has never been done. And so we're getting up and running on a whole new way to look at the effects of groundwater pumping on habitat in the basin. We also know from the water budget analysis that the future water budget has some differences than the past water budget. Dry year flows, meaning non-storm flows, are a little bit lower in the future, in part due to additional groundwater development in the Valley due to build out up through the year 2050 and climate change. And we also know that historically, which is the graph I'm showing you here, surface water flows have been lower in the past. In the 40s, 50s, surface water flows were very low, leaving the basin because of the type of groundwater development that had taken place. Over time, with heavy agricultural use moving away and municipal use coming in, and then with the advent of imported water, we began to see steadier surface water flows in the river. In this line here, do you see this arrow I'm moving around on the
Yeah.
graph?
Yes.
Okay. So to the left of this green arrow is the history. To the right is what the groundwater sustainability plan projects moving into the future. So if you just step back and look, you can see that future surface water flows are pretty similar to the past. They're not as low as they were in the 50s and 60s. They're largely maintained, but there are some reductions in flow for the reasons that I mentioned. This is a graphic that looks at things on an annual basis. The previous graphic I showed was monthly. This is annual. And what this shows is our current groundwater budget contributes a certain amount of flow across the county line, as indicated in this purple line. When we look at future development in the valley, consider climate change and future groundwater use, we see that in some cases, flow across the county line will be a little bit less. Over on the right-hand side of this graphic, you can see sort of a big difference here. Purple is the current budget, green is the proposed budget. This difference here occurs during a drought year when there's quite a bit of pumping. The bottom axis here shows groundwater pumping increasing. What is one of the most important things with this graphic, though, is how similar past and future flows track. There are some differences. But even here, when water levels are low, we're still simulating roughly 15,000 acre feet of water crossing the county line. That's a lot of water still.
Hey, Rick.
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. This is Jeff Berry. One thing to add is that this graph that you're looking at is the annual non-storm stream flow. So this does not include all the stormwater flow, which is massive relative to this amount that's crossing the basin boundary. So you might want to elaborate on that. This is just summertime flow, non-storm flow.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we've got a good understanding of past surface water flows and future surface water flows. We know there are going to be some differences in the future, but we don't find them to be significant in the big picture. So moving on, the team prepared an evaluation of groundwater dependent ecosystems in the valley. This was a group of tasks that went on for quite a while, shared with the Stakeholder Advisory Committee. And we started with looking at groundwater dependent ecosystems. Okay, so we know the regulations require we look at other factors. We know there was a guidance document prepared by the Nature Conservancy. There are multiple online databases to look at. Tom Barnes' group with ESA hit that issue head on. They reviewed databases, and then they ground truthed the habitat in a number of areas. With that, we further refined our understanding of what's on the ground. Later, we revised it a little bit further to filter out areas where groundwater was greater than 30 feet deep, because that's a conservative way to include GDEs while filtering out areas that aren't likely to be GDEs. So with that understanding, we then kept moving forward and said, okay, well, we've got a good handle on what's going on in the valley. What would undesirable results look like? Well, we've got an area upstream from Interstate 5 where there are unarmored three-spine stickleback present. There's some flowing water there. There are some pools there. If groundwater pumping were to cause that water to stop and the pools to dry out, that would clearly be an undesirable result. And that's something that the GSA should manage to avoid that from happening. Further downstream from I-5, there's more water in the river. The habitat is different. And we don't want to see large changes, chronic effects in the habitat there. So we got our arms around what undesirable results would be. Then we had to look at, okay, we know what we know what we're looking for. How do we know if they're happening? That's where this third bullet comes in, the special monitoring program with GDEs and use of the triggers. Why did we set the triggers where we did? Because the triggers are reflective of a drought condition. There was stress in the watershed, but there's also a very resilient community of plants and animals in this watershed. So even though the water levels were low, which is where we set the triggers, it's an area where the habitat was sustained, though a little bit stressed. We developed the evaluation process, which we presented to your board in the past. It's a multi-step process that looks at water levels relative to triggers. If we're approaching the triggers, then we look a little closer and we say, we're approaching the triggers. Does it look like we're actually going to reach the trigger? If the answer is yes, then we will begin the evaluation process and look at the habitat. The GSP's implementation budget includes funds to have an environmental firm, a biologist go out and check certain areas. The evaluation process will take place when it looks like there's a potential that we'll reach the trigger. And when that evaluation process is completed, we'll have an understanding. Are we heading towards undesirable results or not? Is it something we need to keep monitoring, or do we think, given the time of year, future forecasts, do we think undesirable results could take place? If the answer is yes, then management actions are implemented. The GDE monitoring area is a large area. You can see on the map, it includes it includes the Santa Clara River, upstream from I-5, just about up to Bouquet Canyon. It goes up into San Francisco Canyon and Castaic Creek. These pinkish colored squares are wells. Some exist, some are to be constructed. Those are the wells that we will be monitoring to see if we're approaching the triggers. And as I mentioned, if it looks like the trigger is going to be reached, we won't wait around. Or certainly if it is reached, we're going to jump and do an evaluation. There are 6 questions in the evaluation process. Those are included in attachment 3. It's a fairly lengthy section. I don't plan to go through all those 6 questions, but if your board would like to do those, we can do that. And with Tom Barnes' help, we can move through those. So we'll be consulting with landowners. Landowners are stakeholders. They will have information to add. We need their cooperation to gain access. We might need them to reduce pumping from their wells in certain cases. So there will be coordination with landowners or consultation. The evaluation report will be prepared and presented. There will be recommendations. Do we monitor or do we implement actions? We will present that evaluation to your board quarterly as needed. Now I'm going to jump into a generalized example of how the process works. So imagine there are a series of wells in the basin. They have data loggers in them. So we're visiting the wells, downloading data on a regular basis. We'll be looking for trends. In mid-June, we begin to see a declining water level. Nothing unusual about that, given summertime and drought. We'll check it again in July. If we see the level is trending lower and lower, and it suggests that we may reach that trigger in a month or maybe 45 days, we'll do an evaluation report. The on-call consultant will be called. They'll be asked to go out in the field, take a look at key areas, look at the nature of the habitat. If undesirable results are anticipated when we, if the water levels continue to go down, we'll implement management actions. Selection of the management actions take place and they're implemented. And we will be consulting with landowners in this process. That's not on the slide, but we won't be doing this in a vacuum. This is a graph showing the concepts behind water levels, evaluation, and implementation of actions. So can you see my green arrow on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a hydrograph of a generic well, GDE monitoring well, consistent with how water levels work in the basin. We have highs and lows. So we go from a high to a low, we don't reach the trigger, water levels recover, and we begin seeing water levels decline again. We'll be looking at the data. We'll be determining, does it look like we're going to hit the trigger? If the answer is yes, and by the way, this dashed line suggests where we think the water level is going. Okay, it's just diagrammatic. If the answer is yes, we'll begin the GDE evaluation process. That's 30, 45 days ahead of where we think we might reach the trigger. If the evaluation says, yeah, we think there may be concern here, we think undesirable results are potentially going to take place, we would implement management actions down here in this green bar within 1 to 2 weeks. And that would be, for example, reducing pumping in a nearby well or possibly wells. What would happen after that is we'd have a result and water levels would begin to come back up. During that time, we'd be monitoring and evaluating. So that's it conceptually, how that works. We see a trend. We have the potential for undesirable results. We modify pumping and water levels come up. And that process takes place in a reasonable time to avoid undesirable results. Now I'm going to share with your board some proof of concept work that the team has done.
Mr. Beergoods, could I ask you a question before we move on?
Of course.
So in your example, and I can't draw on it, so I was going to draw on it, but in your example, the first decrease in July, August, September, then it heads back up. Then the next decrease, the next July, that's where you are going into the evaluation process, is in the second decrease. Why didn't we do it in the first? Because we expected it to come back up in the fall, but if we expected it the first time and didn't undertake the evaluation process, what would make us think the second time around that it wouldn't come back up?
That's a great question. And the answer is the second time we're tracking not just water levels, we're looking at future climate. If it looks like we're in a progressively drier period season to season, and we see groundwater demand is expected to go up, then we put those pieces together and we say, you know what, given those factors, we think we are going to go below the trigger.
And so if we were to, I suppose you're looking at things like NOAA, National Weather Service predictions of whether we're having a La Nina or an El Nino or things like that. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, we're looking at forecasts of future weather conditions, and we're also looking at groundwater demand in the valley. SCV Water plans for, they conjunctively manage the basin. And so what that means is SCV Water is continually evaluating how much water they plan to pump from the ground and how much water they plan to import. And that's an analysis that is always underway. And if that analysis suggests that during this period we need to lean on groundwater pumping more and that could cause the water levels to go down, that's when we look at managing pumping differently.
All right, thank you.
Rick, I might want to add something just to help with answering
Sure.
Director Natoli's question. So as you said, we'd be looking at climate, but specifically rainfall. This is, again, just a hypothetical example. And so we would have known that previous winter and where that great dark gray line is in January and through spring, how are we doing with respect to rainfall for that water year? And it could be that we're much lower rainfall. And so that's another huge clue to tell us that we didn't get the recharge the previous winter, and makes it more likely that we might approach that trigger. So that's really the importance of the rainfall monitoring that we're going to do.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Berry. That was helpful. Please continue, Mr. Viergoots.
Thank you, President Natoli. So what we've done is we've evaluated how this would actually work. And though that isn't something new, we've taken care to evaluate it in a way and present it that's a little bit more easy for your board to see. So what we've done is we've conducted a range of simulations to assess water level responses to these management actions. We're going to show you two modeling scenarios. And what you'll see is they show the water elevations, the groundwater elevations come up after implementation of management actions. You might ask, well, hey, how come it doesn't come up more? Well, drought. Drought is a big contributing factor to water levels in the basin too. And so pumping reductions can move the needle and can cause water levels to increase. And that's what we're finding with the simulations. But drought also plays a critical factor in water levels. Here is the GDE map that I shared with you earlier. We're focusing in on two areas. This is the area just upstream, some Interstate 5. Interstate 5 comes up through here. We'll have a well here called GDEB. And it's in this area where we have some flowing water and even some pools that may support or do support the unarmored three-spine stickleback. So we used the model to simulate water levels in this area. And what we find is that over time, we show water levels hovering around the trigger and going beneath the trigger in this area. Now, the way the process works is because the water levels are below this trigger, we would be doing an evaluation process. In this example, though, we're making the finding that, yes, it's below the trigger, but there's still plenty of flow in the river. The plants aren't showing signs of distress. Let's keep monitoring it, but we don't need management actions in this period. And I also want to point out to your board that there's been a lot of talk about triggers, of course. And in this particular area, the trigger level is actually set because of our concern about the unarmored three-spine stickleback, 2 feet higher than the historic low to make sure we've got plenty of time to adapt if we need to. So in this area, we're finding that we don't need to modify pumping because the habitat is in good shape. But this next year, we begin to see a confluence of factors that we've talked about, and Jeff did a great job articulating that water levels may in fact go beneath the trigger. Based on what we've learned the previous seasons, we've got a feel for if that would be a concern. And we find that, yes, you know what? The trend is that they're going to go below, and they are even going to go below historic low and even reach the minimum threshold. And based on what we've seen, we think there could be undesirable results. And so a management action is taken, pumping is reduced. This purple line indicates the groundwater level after a pumping reduction. And I think you can see pretty quickly that a pumping reduction avoids water levels going deep and causes them to recover some during this period. And if we zoom in a little bit, so what I've done is I've taken that graph and I've expanded the x-axis by a factor of 5 just to share with you that this is going to be a long process, 6 months or so, maybe more, while we're really tracking these new groundwater levels, just to make sure that what we're expecting to see, we see. And if we need to adapt, we can do that. The important point, or one of the important points on this example is this management action actually raises the water level above the historic low. So it's very conservative. Over time, with this work and with implementation of management actions, we're going to tighten up our understanding of what the triggers should be. Should the triggers be higher? Should they be lower? It's going to take a few years to develop information to understand that. So what I'm showing you here is a very conservative approach. Let me move on to the next example. So here we're in the Santa Clara River, but we're just downstream of the confluence with Castaic Creek upstream. We have a slightly different water level trend. I think you can see it's descending. And we see a point here where it crosses the trigger. Well, the evaluation would have been done that season, and we would have said, we think we're okay. We don't need to implement management actions here. There's plenty of flow. The habitat looks good, maybe a little bit stressed, but a lot of that's from drought. So we wouldn't implement a management action in this case. But we come out of that dry season and we head into another dry season. And again, we're looking at a confluence of factors. And we say, okay, yep, there's a potential for undesirable results. It looks like, we're not there yet, but let's do something to bring water levels back up. And a management action is implemented. And this darker purple line reflects the change in water levels in this area. The water levels come up above where they were heading. And we continue to monitor throughout this period to evaluate how this is working. Are the water levels coming up like we expect? Is the habitat still doing well? And these are two examples that we think are good for the purpose of discussion. And that concludes the simulations and the overall presentation. Our recommendation is that your board, of course, consider this and provide us direction in preparation of the final draft GSP, which we intend to bring to your board on January 3rd. So thank you, President Nicoli. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Beergoots. Are there members of the board who have comments or questions for either Mr. Berry or Mr. Beergoots? Director Cooper.
Rick, thank you very much. That was very easy to understand. I went through the package of all of the letters and the responses to the letters that were received. And while it explained exactly what you were planning on doing, this was so much easier to understand and understand a little more of the long-term effects, that it's not immediate, and how it does bring those levels back up. So I really appreciate it. This was excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's a
Director
big team
Martin.
effort.
Always. Go ahead, Director Martin.
Unmute myself. Thank you, President Natoli. And Rick and staff, excellent presentation. Appreciate it very much. Very thoughtful, very comprehensive, and right on target, I believe. A couple of questions. We talk about monitoring wells and reviewing, and you're talking about having data loggers. How often are they actually looked at during the year? And second question is, does it take a board action to execute a management action, or is the management team pre-authorized to take whatever action is necessary in accordance with the GSP? Two questions. Thanks, Rick.
Excellent questions. The monitoring of the GDE wells with the data loggers will be continuous, although we'll be looking at them much more closely in summer and when water levels begin to drop. So it could be monthly, could be more frequently than monthly. But in the very wet periods, we will allow the data logger to continue to collect data, but monitor more frequently when we really see water levels start dropping. Your second question is a good one, and we've talked about that internally. Ideally, we would have plenty of time to come back to your board and deliver a GDE evaluation report and say, President Natoli or whoever the president is at the time, we see this occurring. SCV Water is coordinating to implement management actions, and we can discuss it at that time. But you can see in the slide that there might be a month or two until a decision is made. If your board isn't scheduled to meet, I expect that the GSP team would look to coordinate and begin implementing management actions ahead of your next meeting. But certainly that's up to your board.
If I may add to that a little bit, I agree that some items can be taken by this management actions can be taken by the staff. I imagine that the board would want to establish parameters on that. You wouldn't want to give your staff a blank check, but within certain ranges. The one thing that I do think takes board action is imposing a pumping restriction on a non-party. In other words, on somebody besides SCV Water. That would have to take board action before doing it. There might or might not be an exception for an emergency. So I would say that hopefully you'll see it in enough time to go through that formal process of pumping allocations.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you, Tom, for your clarification. Appreciate it.
Do any other board members have comments or questions? I have a few. One of the management actions you discussed, Mr. Gertz, was coordinating with landowners to reduce the pumping. What authority will the GSA have to make landowners reduce their pumping?
For the legal authority, I'm going to ask Tom to participate. The approach is that we'll be coordinating and seeking cooperation and modification of pumping if needed. Tom, can you further describe where we would go, perhaps, if we didn't have cooperation, what the authority would be?
Yes, the authority comes straight out of Sigma. It gives the board as I mentioned a second ago, the power to impose allocations on pumping, and that those can be different among different people. There is sort of a gloss on that, although Sigma says that the board doesn't have the power to determine water rights, and many of us have interpreted that to mean that any actions taken have to be consistent with water rights and water rights priorities. So it's a somewhat big deal to impose water allocations, and hopefully we'll be given enough time to go through that process.
Very good, thank you. There are it seems like there are a lot of things that are going to need to be monitored, Mr. Virgood. Somebody's looking at weather, somebody's looking at rainfall, somebody's looking at pumping. Who is going to be monitoring all these moving pieces?
We expect the SCV water team to be monitoring it. We have field staff that gauge wells already for SCV water and are familiar with using data loggers. We may be able to use those staff or perhaps consultant services. In terms of the future climate, precipitation, SCV water has a team of people that are already coordinating every 2 weeks, watching demand, watching weather, looking at precipitation patterns. So I think it makes sense to keep that in-house.
Very good, thank you. And then one more question. You talked about the trigger at the GDE B well at I-5. So the water level drops below the trigger, and then there's a monitoring period afterwards. I'm wondering, how is it a trigger if we don't take any action when it passes the trigger?
Well, the trigger is designed to cause action if it hasn't already been taken as it heads towards the trigger. So we're actually taking action ahead of the trigger. The trigger itself, President Natoli, isn't magic. It's criteria that says we're heading there, we're going to cross it, let's evaluate to understand the system better.
So in effect, it's really a trigger for the evaluation.
That's exactly right.
All right. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you. If there are no other comments from the board, Mr. Vergutz, did you have something to add?
No, I do not.
All right.
We're looking for your direction.
Very good. If there are no other comments from the board, and I see none, let's open this up for public comment. Ms. Kang, do we have anyone signed up to comment on this item?
Yes, we do have a public comment. Give me one
Please go ahead.
moment, please. Ms. Faulkner, whenever you're ready, you may begin your public comment.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking public comment today. And I just appreciate all the work that you've done on this plan. I do have a couple of questions and a comment. First of all, I was pretty vocal about my advocacy for the environmental community on the advisory committee in stating that I think the water levels are set too low. I am repeating that again. I think the water levels are set too low. Also, a question that I had is the water agency policing the GSA? And who is the true authority here? And is there a separation? I mean, where's the, I'm not understanding now that today we're learning something new that I didn't realize in all of the months on the advisory committee, that you're asking well owners to lower their pumping or, start. I just don't know how you're going to police that. I don't know where the authority comes from, and I don't understand who is going to be monitoring that and how you enforce it. So if somebody could please answer those questions, I would appreciate it. And I'll cede back a minute 36. But I might have more questions later. So depending on how this is answered. Thank you.
This is President Natoli. Ms. Fortner, before we move on, could you just clarify for me, and you can stop the clock, Secretary King, the two questions, the authority, where the authority comes from for reducing, having a private well owner reduce their pumping, and then what was could you clarify?
Is there a separation? I mean, is there a separation between the GSA and the actual water agency? Because it sounds like they're putting a lot of onus on the water agency to do the policing. And I'm not sure if that is, I understood that there was to be some separation between the two. And I know that we have a lot of board members from the agency on the GSA as it is now. But my understanding was that there was supposed to be some sort of separation, and I just don't see how this is enforceable.
All right, thank you. Mr. Bunn or Mr. Virgoots, let's first go to the authority for reducing pumping question. And I think, Mr. Bunn, you sort of touched on that, but is there a way you could expand on that answer?
Sure, because I got to statutory language in the meantime. Sigma provides that, and I'm quoting, a groundwater sustainability agency shall have the following authority and may regulate groundwater extraction using that authority. And one of the items there is to control groundwater extractions by regulating, limiting, or suspending extractions from individual groundwater wells or extractions from groundwater wells in the aggregate. And then it goes on with things like construction of new wells, enlargement of wells, reactivation. It says the action shall be consistent with the applicable elements of a city or county general plan. And basically allows the groundwater authority to do that. And it does not impose extensive hearing requirements or anything like that. That's just one of the powers given to the groundwater authority. I'd also like to address Ms. Fortner's other point, if I may. Sigma was specifically designed to allow groundwater suppliers to be groundwater sustainability agencies, along with cities and counties and joint powers authorities. And my recollection was when this joint powers authority was set up, we certainly contemplated collaboration between the various members of the authority, but there was no action taken to say there should be any distance of or separation between the pumping agency and the the groundwater authority itself.
Which sort of perhaps goes to the question that I've brought up in the past on occasion about conflicts of interest. I mean, if the GSA says you need to tell Santa Clarita Valley Water Agency you need to stop pumping from this well, there are 4 board members, as Ms. Fortner pointed out, who also sit on the board of the Santa Clarita Valley Water Agency. Are we opening ourselves up to a conflict of interest? And if the GSA says stop the pumping, can those 4 board members go back to their Santa Clarita Valley Water Agency board and vote no?
That's kind of my point too, Gina, in that it's kind of like the fox watching the hen house here. And I've been pretty vocal about these concerns all along, and that this is alarming. I don't think this is the spirit or the intent of Sigma. I think that this is not in line with the spirit of it.
I think your concern is understood, and I don't know how we address that. I don't know if Mr. Marks or Mr. Cole have a comment on that. I don't know that that's something that Mr. Bunn can look up in Sigma, because I don't know that that's specifically in the enabling legislation. But if someone could comment a little more about who has the bigger stick here. Is it the GSA or is it the water agency?
And to go even beyond that, it's other GSAs that surround us have a representation from the serving agency, but the GSA isn't made up of members of the serving agency. They actually have a disparate group of people working on the GSA together and collaboratively. And I don't see that in our particular case. But I have looked at GSAs neighboring us.
Thank you, Ms. Fortner. If we could get a response from either Mr. Cole or Mr. Marks, whoever would like to make a comment, it would certainly be appreciated.
Sure, I'll take a run at it. I think there are examples in the state of many different ways in which groundwater sustainability agencies have been set up. So to throw it all into one basket is probably not the right way to look at it. So I think there's been several examples of, joint powers authorities like we decided to set up here in the community. And I reflect that as the collective we. That's why our board is made up of a diverse, representatives, both from the city, 2 members from the county, and then 4 from the water agency. So I think, that was done in consideration of trying to have a balanced reflection and a place that, these types of things could be debated and considered and thought about. I think the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, the JPA itself, is an entity. And so that entity has specific authorities that Mr. Bunn has alluded to. So I don't look at it as, one entity having, a bigger stick than the other. I look at it as a forum in which, the leaders that are represented by these different entities can debate policy and decide on how to manage the groundwater basin sustainably. So, Dirk, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
But I think it's also important to recognize that all the parties, SCV Water and the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, are certainly motivated to make sure that the basin is operated in a sustainable manner. Maybe Tom could comment on this further, but if you are not achieving sustainability, you lose local control of your groundwater basin potentially. The state board, I believe, is given the authority to operate groundwater basins that are not, number one, whose plans don't achieve sustainability. But I would imagine if you're following a plan and then, or you've developed a plan and you're not following it, I would think similarly, they might end up with the authority to actually run the groundwater basin. So I think that there was significant incentives for both the agency and SCV Water to make sure that we are achieving sustainability in this basin.
Thank you, Mr. Marks, and thank you, Mr. Cole. I would just like to add, I also sit as the county representative on the Santa Monica Basin GSA, and there are 5 member agencies part of that JPA. Santa Monica is 90% of the pumper, but they also sit on the GSA, and they have said over and over, it is in their best interest to make sure that the basin is pumped sustainably, not just because of the state, but because they have a constituency to provide water to. So as far as they're concerned, it's in their best interest to do what's necessary to make sure the basin is sustainable in the future. And I would hope that's the same. And I expect that that's the same for the Santa Clarita Valley Water Agency as well.
I'd just like to make one more comment, as I may, and that is that groundwater sustainability agencies were designed to be planning agencies, policy-making agencies, and they're given certain powers so that they can implement those plans, but it was never thought that they would be a regulatory agency.
Interesting. So someone has to implement, and it seems by design, it's the pumpers in the groundwater pumpers in the basin who would be the ones that would implement that. And when we talk about cooperation, we just hope and expect that we'd be able to do that in any of our groundwater basins in the state. Thank you, Mr. Bunn. That's helpful. And Ms. Fortner, I don't know if you had other comments, other questions. I know you have a little bit of time left.
Ms. Natoli, President Natoli, I believe Ms. Fortner's 3 minutes has up. Would you like to give her an additional minutes?
I believe there was about 1 minute and 16 seconds left.
I believe part of the dialogue is part of public comment time.
And I had asked you to stop the clock. It was about 1 minute and 16 seconds left. So I'd hate to go back on earlier comment. Director Atkins, can you wait until we finish with Ms. Fortner? Thank you.
Ms. Fortner, do you have any additional comments?
Yeah, thank you, President Natoli. I appreciate that very much. Last comment would be that hope is never a strategy, and that I would like to see more, I can't think of the word I'm looking for. I would have liked to have seen more diversity on our GSA, and therefore more diverse input from the different groups that could be involved but didn't have the opportunity to be. And that's it.
Thank you, Ms. Fortner. Director Atkins, would you like to make your comment now or wait until our second public speaker?
Wait. Thank you.
It's not working, BJ.
Yes, I'm not sure you were really
I said I can wait. Can you hear me?
Breaking up.
very much breaking up.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but you sound like some alien in the Star Trek universe has
Hello.
R2TD.
technology.
Too bad.
Tell you what, can you wait? Let's go to the next public speaker and we'll try again after that. It sometimes helps if you turn off your video. So Director Atkins, why don't you go ahead and turn off your video and then we'll see if that doesn't help. In the meantime, Secretary Kang, do we still have another public speaker?
Yes, we do.
Right, please go ahead.
Kay Ford, whenever you're ready, you may begin your public comment.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
Hi, I just had a couple of things that were concerning to me. I read earlier that there's less than 40% chance of water supplies getting back to normal after this winter. And there's more than a 50% chance of the state's drought worsening. Additionally, Governor Newsom has us under these emergency drought orders. We're being asked to reduce our water usage by 15%. And then I believe Lynn mentioned what legal authority the water agency has in asking, am I understanding this, private property owners to reduce the usage of their own wells? Is that correct? And I'm sorry.
No,
Can we
please,
pause it?
please go ahead and finish with your questions and we'll try and get someone to answer those all at once.
Perfect, because as I understand it, property owners have a bundle of rights, which includes water, mineral, and air. I'm pretty sure that nobody can infringe on those rights. And if property owners have acres of land that require the well to pump water to care for that land, I don't understand where the water agency can come in and say, we're going to ask you, air quotes, ask you to cooperate with us and use less of that while we're approving all of these developments around this valley and not batting an eye at that. I mean, you guys are signing these approvals for the Department of Regional Planning saying that there's enough water for these new developments. Are you guys asking them to reduce their water usage? I mean, that's something I'm watching right now, actually, because we're having major dust and airborne particulate problems from Mission Village next to us, and the watering trucks that are being used are not sufficient at all. So if it's being monitored and they're not in compliance with the conditional use permit, and it would require them using more water to keep that down, how does that affect that? Because if you're going to approve these developments to keep doing what they're doing and then imposing all of this stuff on everyone else, that's not right. So I would also like to see what it is that these new developments, not just 5 Point, I'm talking about everything. I mean, collectively in this valley, we're going to increase homes over 55,000 homes. I think that was the recent number that I looked at. It might be more. So if we're going to keep putting this demand on water when we already have a strain on supply, and we're going to keep asking people to reduce or ration, and now you want to ask private landowners to reduce their own well usage, I don't think that you can. And to the degree of the California Constitution, property owners have rights that you cannot infringe on. So if people really wanted to make a stink about it, they could take you to court over it. So if you want to impose those restrictions on homeowners, you better start imposing those on your approvals as well, because it doesn't make sense.
Ms. Ford, thank you so much for your public comment.
I'm sorry, your time has expired. And so who would like to take a shot at answering those questions about private property owners being told to reduce the pumping? Is that you again, Councilor Bunn?
I'd be happy to, Madam President.
Thank you.
Private pumpers absolutely do have water rights. Those water rights are in conjunction with the other pumpers in the basin, and there's a long history of cases saying that you can't overpump a groundwater basin. And as I mentioned before, the Groundwater Sustainability Agency is empowered to limit extractions, but my interpretation of it anyway is that that has to be done consistently with California water rights. So I believe that that can be done, and that's the reason for the legislature providing it that way. I'm not going to get into approvals of new developments, though, because the Groundwater Sustainability Agency has nothing to do with that.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Director Atkins, why don't we see if we can get to your comments or questions now?
Thank you. I had to leave and come back. Can you hear me now?
A
No,
little
you can't
bit,
hear me. You
little
cannot
bit.
hear me.
a little
No.
bit.
You cannot hear me.
I still recommend you turn off your video though.
Okay. Does that help?
Actually, it does. You freed up a
Okay.
lot of bandwidth.
Okay, so basically, I apologize. I had to leave and come back, try and get this worked out. I have listened to Ms. Fortner's comments. I wasn't able to listen to the second person, but I will tell you that as a former Newhall County Water District Board Director, as a pumper, we've done not only at Newhall County, but at Valencia Water Company and other pumpers in the valley, at least those commercial pumpers have done and gone to great lengths to try and maintain or provide sustainable pumping systems, and the thresholds set by Mr. Vergoots and his staff and the consultants are well thought out. They are the best we have to offer. In other words, our best and brightest have developed these thresholds. And to say that they are artificially low is disingenuous. And I take offense. So I'm in support of what Mr. Vergoots has presented. I like what staff has presented, and I think we should go forward. And that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Atkins. And if I may, Mr. Vergoots, this is our best guess as to how to move forward. And if it's not working, we can modify it, correct?
That's correct, President Tolley. It is an adaptive process.
Very good. Thank you very much. Are there any other comments or questions from members of the board?
President Natoli, looks like Ms. Ford is asking, and Ms. Fortner asking for additional public comments. Would you allow that?
No, I think we've already had public comment on the items, so I'm ready for us to move on to item 4.2.
Then there is no other public comment.
Very well, thank you. Then we are moving on to item 4.2, draft responses to public comments of the SCV GSA draft groundwater sustainability plan. Mr. Vergoots, please proceed.
Of course, President Natoli. I am doing my usual fumbling here, switching the presentation. Okay, are you able to see the title slide?
Yes, we are.
Perfect. All right. Well, let's jump into it then. And I have a presentation that has, it's got about 20 slides in it. You're going to hear from me, you'll hear from Tom Bunn, you'll hear from Kathy Martin. Jeff Berry has a number of slides that he's going to share, and we will jump into this next. So thank you. Okay, so we have a number of public comments you could see in the attachment to the board memo. These are the common themes. There might be some others in there, but that we missed. But these are the items we want to talk to your board about today. We realize that there might be things in the attachment to the board letter that you want to go through specifically. So I certainly want to do that if your board would like to pull out any items in the attachment to the board letter, but we're going to hit the key points here as the team goes through things. Now, these first three items in the table, we're just going to cover verbally, and then we have a series of slides on these other components, and we'll expand on them more. When we get to the groundwater dependent ecosystems, Jeff Berry is going to share his screen. He's prepared some slides which are too big to merge at this point, so we'll get that figured out. So enough of that setup. Let me jump in. Okay, so we have a number of key themes with the public trust doctrine. And Tom, I wonder if you could talk about this slide and the next one on public trust for us.
Sure, I'd be happy to. The comments generally talked about the public trust and said that the plan should consider effects on the public trust. And it's true that our plan did not specifically mention the word public trust in very many places. So the answer is that the drafting team recognized that we do have to consider effects on public trust resources, which were the traditional navigation, commerce, and fisheries, but also recreational and environmental uses of surface water. And our plan does consider and protect those uses by protecting the environmental uses of groundwater, the GDEs, the interconnected surface water, all the things that you've heard about earlier today, and you will hear as Mr. Vergoots goes farther into his slide deck. So we view the definition of public trust as being very similar to the requirements of the Sigma regulations to consider surface stream depletion and groundwater dependent ecosystems. Oops. And on human right to water, that's about the same thing. We didn't ever use the words human right to water. The regulations require the department, they don't say anything about what should be in the plan. They require the Department of Water Resources to keep human right to water in mind while evaluating the plan. But in our view, the human right to water, which is, you might remember, was enacted by a recent statute. So it's not completely clear what its boundaries are. But there's general agreement that it encompasses the rights of disadvantaged communities. It encompasses domestic wells, and it encompasses drinking water and drinking water quality. And we have addressed all of those issues. And as a result of the comments made in those different issues, again, you'll see later on in this presentation, that has led to consideration in the plan, and there'll be consideration as we go forward to implement the plan.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, Jeff, I'm going to go through this slide, and then after that, we're going to switch presenters, okay? So we have
Sounds
a
good.
number of slides on the groundwater dependent ecosystem key themes, and fortunately, we've had a really good discussion on item 4.1 ahead of this. Key themes: historical condition. Some suggest that undesirable results did occur in the past. We don't see that. We're going to share some very interesting information with your board today. Comments about triggers, upland GDEs, water reclamation plant flows. As we've described, the river corridor is, of course, it's dynamic. It has experienced drought, it's experienced flood. It's overall a resilient system. Triggers reflect past resilience to drought. And in terms of historical conditions in the basin and whether or not undesirable results have taken place in the past, we have information on this. We have information on historical water levels. We've looked at water level data. We've used the numeric flow model to evaluate changes in water levels over time. Jeff is going to share with you information about the Enhanced Vegetative Index, satellite data. And I think what you'll find when Jeff goes through that is there are some changes in habitat over time, but overall it's a very resilient system. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Jeff. I'm going to stop sharing, Jeff.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Jeff Berry with GSI. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Well, we see you.
You see me? Okay, hold on. Sorry.
There we go.
How's that? Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So obviously, for the last year and a half, we've been talking about the importance of the river, the riparian corridor, the plants and animals that live in that area. And what I wanted to share with you is how we're going to go about monitoring the groundwater dependent ecosystems. Specifically, you've heard a lot about the water levels monitoring, et cetera, but there's more to it. So we've got this table that summarizes this. On the left is GDE monitoring location. On the right is what are the observations that we're going to be making. So we've talked about the groundwater levels, which will be measured with data loggers that will be continuous, probably on the order of every hour, but we'll be collecting the data monthly during the summer at 8 GDE monitoring locations in the main river corridor and in a couple of the tributaries. And we'll be looking at trends relative to the triggers. We're also going to be at each of those locations looking at surface water flow monthly during the summer. So presence, absence, how much flow. We'll be looking at the gauge data at the Old Road Bridge and also downstream at the basin boundary. That's important. There's a couple of things that are relatively new. We're intending to do some limited biological monitoring at each of the monitoring locations along the GDE area. At each of the 8 locations, we're going to be completing a limited evaluation. And this would occur especially during periods in the summer when we're most concerned about the health of the habitat. Lastly, we're going to be looking at enhanced vegetative index. So I'm going to go over some slides that will help explain what I'm talking about. But this would be monthly during the summer or during critical periods where we're concerned about whether we can detect changes in the vegetation. So there's multiple ways in which we're going to be monitoring the GDEs. As Rick mentioned, we're going to be using the EVI, the satellite imagery analysis. It looks at the relative greenness of the vegetative community. It's again mostly focused as a screening tool. It's satellite based. It's Landsat. It's free, by the way. And I'm going to show you some examples of how we might use that information. So you've seen this map before. This shows you in the green the mapped GDE areas. I've identified these reaches within the GDE area. There's reach 1, which basically is east of the I-5 bridge. Reach 2 is the middle reach down to Castaic Creek. And then reach 3 is from Castaic Creek confluence down to the basin boundary. We've also been looking at using EVI, the Enhanced Vegetated Index. We looked at the Savannah Oaks, which has been brought up a few different times. And we also took a look at Placerita Canyon. There's some oaks up in there that we've been concerned that may be potential GEs. And just as a reminder, the GSP includes all of this evaluation, plus it includes further assessment of whether or not we have other GDEs that need to be included in the monitoring. So I'm going to talk about, just briefly, show you some of the results of this EVI work. This is for the entire reach of the GDE area, all 3 reaches and the tributaries that were green on that other map. And what I'm showing you here is the signature in this kind of up and down gray line here. It's called the EVI index. It's unitless. It's basically looking at the multispectral analysis of the red band and the near infrared frequencies of light. And it's an indicator of the relative activity of chlorophyll. So when things are really green, you see that index goes up. And when things start turning brown or neutral in color, the values go down. And so you see seasonally, there's a lot of variation. And this graph goes from the year 2000 on the left all the way to present day. And there's a few things to show. The bars here represent rainfall. So there's obviously going to be a correlation of plant health and rainfall. And what's some of the interesting observations here are, overall, there's not been a huge change over this last 20 years. We see back in the year 2000 all the way out to present day, we're in a similar band, similar variation. We have within that period seen some significant changes. Like, for example, in this period right here, 2005, there was a big reduction in the EVI. And why is that? Well, there happened to be a major flood in the river at that point in time that took out a lot of vegetation. And I'm going to show you a map view of what we can see from the EVI with regard to the reduction in greenness, chlorophyll activity. Likewise, in the drought, you can see here roughly from water year 2012 on, and some would argue that we're still in it. I would certainly argue. You can see that there was a little reduction overall, but not much. What this told us was we need to break down the river into reaches so we could see what was happening in different parts of the corridor, because they all have different things going on with respect to the river and groundwater interaction. So I'm gonna walk you through that. So this is reach 1, and as you might recall, this is the east end of the basin, basically east of the I-5 bridge, upstream of the I-5 bridge, and you can see this is the signature just for that area, nothing else. And basically it's been pretty consistent through that entire period of time, that entire 20-year period. You see a little reduction in that flood period, but overall, I don't see evidence from at least this data set that there's been some past major impact on the GDE and the riparian zone in the area upstream of the I-5 bridge. Going on to a map view, this is a little harder to review. This is 2004 EVI images here on the right. And what's going to happen is that this cursor is going to pass over, and you're going to start to reveal what it looked like in 2005. And I bring this up because I showed you earlier that 2005 there was a major flood which affected the EVI. So let's see what that looks like. It's going to go back and forth. So 2004 first, and then followed by 2005 on the left. If you notice, if you look closely, if you can see, there's a lot of light colored, less green area in 2005 relative to 2004. You can, it almost looks like it was scoured out due to those floods in this part of the river. You can see that as that cursor passes by and shows you 2005. All right, and I'm gonna move on to the next slide to kind of show you. This is the same reach from 2015 on the right to 2021 to the left. So again, we're going from 2015 compared to 2021. And 2015 was a drought year, definitely. We were right in the middle of the worst part of the drought. But when you look at this, you can see that there's places in 2021 on the east side that are actually in better condition than they were in 2015. There's more greenness. One of the reasons we're interested in this tool is because it's fairly quick and easy to use. It's a nice screening tool. It might help us identify where there are areas that are under stress. All right, so let's move to the next one. This is reach 2. This is the middle reach between the I-5 bridge on the east and the Castaic Creek on the west. Okay, so it's kind of the middle central part of the GDE area. And again, you can see relatively consistent. We see a few spikes, which I'm not sure what these are, both up and down. I don't know if those are data anomalies or what they are. But overall uniform. You can see there was a drop in 2005 in this time frame, as I've showed you before, just as occurred on the east side. But overall, relatively uniform. Let's go to the next slide. This is the same kind of slider. It starts out 2015 and now it's revealing 2021 in the central part of the basin. It's interesting to me that, it's not a lot different than 2015. It's a little greener actually than 2015, especially over here by the I-5 bridge. We'll just let it play a little bit more. You're looking up in Castaic Creek, it's a little greener up there. Just another way of looking at the health of the riparian area. And again, this is just looking at vegetation. This is not considering the habitat for the animals that live there. Okay, this is the flood. Take a look at what's happened in the flood. Again, 2005 is what's trailing here. You see all that white area, the less green, indicating that the vegetation was pretty well wiped out. If anybody was around at that time, you would know that. The other thing that's interesting to me is that when you looked at the time series plot that I showed you previously, vegetation rebounds very quickly. So even after we saw this pretty devastating reduction in vegetation, it really the next year, within a year, it was bouncing back. All right, well then let's look at reach 3. And again, this is the area from Castaic Creek on down to the basin boundary. So it's the west end of the boundary. And there's some interesting things here too. Notice, the signature looks a little different. Again, it's very steady. One could argue there's a slight upward trend in the EVI values, but to me, not significant. A few of these peaks that you see here that I don't know what those are, and drops. A little slight effect from that flood event in this reach, and not much evidence of any kind of drought effect, in my mind, starting in 2012 to present. And there's reasons for that. Recall that in this area, this is where the Saugus Formation discharges to the alluvium and ultimately to the river. So we have the Saugus that's basically supplying water to this part of the area and keeping the vegetation pretty green. Let me go to the next slide. Same thing, okay, so we have the flood period in reach 3. This is 2004, 2005. You see that In 2005, there was definitely a reduction in vegetation. It came back. This is Potrero Canyon down here. There's Castaic over on this side. And let's go to 2015 to 2021. Again, this over this whole period, 2015 meaning the enactment of Sigma. It's hard for me to see a real big difference between these 2 years. Looks pretty green all the way throughout. And again, I think it's because there's quite a bit of water. So in a nutshell, I feel like this analysis is helpful as a screening tool for helping us understand the health of the GDE area. It also demonstrates that, in my mind, we don't see undesirable results other than that flood scouring event back in 2005. We don't see stress vegetation using this particular analysis. We also use this tool to help us look at the Placerita Canyon area. There's been concern that we miss some valley oaks that are present up in that area that may be relying on groundwater. We do intend to look at that more carefully. The results of the EVI are a little misleading, and I'll tell you why. It's an area-wide view. It's a 30 meter by 30 meter pixel or resolution from the satellite. The trees are interspersed amongst other vegetation, whether it be brush or grass or other types of vegetation that may be green or brown. So the health of the oak trees in that matrix it's really hard to tell. And that's what I get from this. We just really couldn't tell using this technique, using EVI, what the health of the valley oaks were in the Placerita Canyon area. So we're going to have to use visual observations and an evaluation of that area. Likewise, the Savannah Oak area, we took a look at that too. And it was, interestingly, in that area, you could see this very steep drop in EVI that occurred starting in 2009. But then it started coming back up in 2015. And that didn't seem to make sense to us why that would be. We started looking at it more closely. And again, these oak trees are interspersed with shrubs and other types of vegetation that may not show up on, well, that actually dominate the signature that you see in the satellite greenness. So I guess in closing, we think this is a good screening tool for vegetative health as an indicator of the GDE health. And it's written into the GSP along with biological monitoring, water level monitoring, and observations of surface water flow to help us understand what's happening. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Jeff.
Any questions?
Are there any questions from the board? Don't see any right now. So Mr. Beer-Goots, please proceed.
Thank you, President Natoli. Will do. Okay, we won't spend a lot of time on this, but this is all part of the package with considering GDEs. So sort of the basic summary of what we just walked through with your board. It's a resilient corridor. As Jeff mentioned, we're going to have ongoing monitoring in the future with EVI, with the GDE evaluation process during implementation. The minimum thresholds that we talked about are already designed to avoid unacceptable surface water depletion, but we do have these triggers that are set higher. And the overall approach is to avoid undesirable results from pumping while also studying, filling data gaps, and refining criteria over time. Allow me to switch next. Okay. We're going to move on to some of the discussion about disadvantaged communities and consideration. We received a number of comments on disadvantaged communities regarding disadvantaged communities in general. Clarify our approach to outreach, conduct more outreach. And so we went back and reviewed our earlier work. We conducted additional detailed evaluation of the state's mapped disadvantaged community areas. Rick Vasilopoulos on the team did a really great job with this work. And Kathy and Tara also did a great job with additional outreach. So let me jump into this. This is a map showing the disadvantaged communities. And before we get into the things on the lower right, I want to talk about what's on the top left. This bright yellow area is not a mapped disadvantaged community by the state. It's just Waterworks District 36. That's why it's on here. This area here is in the state's database for disadvantaged communities, but they tell us there's no data. We understand that the Pitches Detention Center is in here. We think that is part of the reason why it's flagged for that area. Moving on to more definitive mapping results. Down in this area, we have disadvantaged communities identified based on the state's database. And you can see in the legend there are different degrees. On the right-hand legend here, it says severely disadvantaged communities, medium household income less than 42,737. So the state has mapped disadvantaged communities in the basin. They do it based on census records, parcel maps, etc. What we did is we looked very carefully then, and this is where Rick really did a ton of work. We rechecked our understanding about where SCV Water's potable water system is in the valley. Realize this is kind of a busy graphic, but the lines that I just dropped in are the SCV Water service lines. And what I want to point out to your board is that as we move through these different shaded areas, you'll see that for the most part, SCV Water service includes these disadvantaged communities. Why is that important? Because one of the comments that we got on disadvantaged communities was there was concern about private well use in the disadvantaged communities. We don't see private well use in these disadvantaged communities. I think you can see that they're pretty well underlain by the water distribution system. There are some differences. There are some areas of open space that are mapped. And what Rick Vasilopoulos did is he went through using GIS and looking at air photos and determined what was generally in these shaded areas. We found that some of the shaded areas mapped as disadvantaged communities included some mobile home parks. We verified phone calls with the mobile home park to see if they were using their own well or if they were connected to SCV Water system. With no exceptions, all of these shaded areas were connected to SCV Water's system. There are some areas not shown on the state's map that are included in our thinking as disadvantaged or underserved communities. Those areas are in Bouquet Canyon, and they include Lily of the Valley. So Bouquet is here. They include Lily of the Valley Mobile Home Park and Lark Ranch. Those are two areas that have traditionally relied on private wells, but as your board knows, there are some concerns with releases from the reservoir in Bouquet. And Lark Ranch, for example, has had to truck water in. Lily of the Valley has had similar issues. Several years ago, recognizing this, SCV Water began coordinating with the state of California and Lark Ranch, and then a little bit later, Lily of the Valley Mobile Home Park, to work to bring a water line up into this area to provide a replacement water supply. So full disclosure, it's not mapped by the state, but we recognize they're clearly underserved with their ability to produce water, and SCV Water has been working to create an alternate water supply. And that project is ongoing. The population with Lark Ranch and Lily of the Valley that will be benefited by this water line that comes in is about 700 people. Rick also went through and looked at population. One of the questions in a comment was, what is the population in the disadvantaged communities? And so Rick went through and looked at the different shape files, those colors that are shown on the map, and utilized the state's database to arrive at a population. A couple cases it wasn't that clear. There is an area on the south east of the map, that large kind of teal color that was in the basin and went well east. This area down here, only a small part of this large area is actually within the GSA. So Rick estimated population in here. So population estimates within the GSA are listed here. You heard me mention both Lark Ranch and Lily of the Valley are not mapped by the state. Rick phoned them to get their population. The other thing you'll see is the water supplier on the bottom row here is SCV Water, with the exception of what I already walked through, these two locations here. So we've done a ton of work confirming what we understood to be the case. And we feel we've done a real good job in outreach. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Kathy, and perhaps you can walk us through why you did the flyer distribution where you did and other details.
Sure, thanks, Rick. And I invite Tara to join us here too. Her team took the lead on the disadvantaged community distribution. Just at a high level, we do the first 5 items on this list with all of our public meetings, the social media website and e-blast, at least one, plus press releases and print and digital ads are distributed extensively. But after the comments that were received, we took that to heart, and Tara's team did some research, looked at those mapped disadvantaged communities, and I will let Tara tell us about the locations that they did and what they found and why those were chosen.
So thank you to the great work of Rick, the other Rick V. We had that great map with very specific, some mobile home communities and some specific addresses. I also worked with Heather from the city of Santa Clarita to talk about her work with disadvantaged communities and to see what she had done. And then we actually went to all of the locations recommended from everyone. And in addition to that, some places wouldn't allow us to leave flyers, so those places were excluded from this flyer distribution list, but we did find nearby grocery stores when we couldn't go into the mobile home park. So we looked for an alternative location that was both nearby and a centralized location for every place where we couldn't leave information in those areas. And in addition to that, we also looked for extra places. So this is kind of above and beyond, including, for example, Vaughn's, Stater Brothers, the Valverde Park, and the community center. So Newhall Library was recommended by Heather. Thank you very much for that. She's not here today, but again, we worked with all of our local partners to determine the list and then to move forward with the largest amount of reach that we possibly could.
Yeah, that's great. Your team got the flyers out. You were ready to roll, hitting the road, placing flyers that day, and it's a great effort. Thank you. All right, wrapping this comment theme up with disadvantaged communities. We did make additional outreach to disadvantaged communities as Tara described ahead of today's meeting. We'll make sure in the future to do additional outreach. As Tara described, we have a good understanding of places where we can go and place flyers, and so we'll do that moving forward. And with two exceptions we already talked about, we don't find evidence of disadvantaged communities reliant on domestic wells. Okay, on to domestic wells. There were comments made about more information was needed about the domestic well depths. And, you know, how much water comes from these wells? What do we know about water quality? Undesirable results for chronic water level declines was also mentioned. And the question was posed, have you talked with private well owners about that? It was a good question, but the groundwater sustainability plan doesn't find chronic declines in water levels in the future. So therefore, there was no reason to approach private well owners with that discussion. We did look at the state's website, and we've improved on a map that's in the groundwater sustainability plan already on well density. Also average well depth, we have that information now. Extraction volumes from de minimis wells is estimated at 500 acre feet a year. That's a number that we have reviewed for many years as we've done planning in the basin. As I mentioned before, we did identify a disadvantaged community population reliant on private wells, estimated at 700 in Bouquet Canyon. This is the map showing both the density of domestic wells per square mile and average well depths. This lighter yellow color is a well density of 1 to 5 wells per square mile. So that's pretty low. You can see on the east and north, the colors are a little darker. Looking at the legend, we're approaching 6 to 10 wells per square mile, 11 to 15, and we've even got one here that looks like 16 to 24 per square mile in Bouquet Canyon. Average well depths come right from the state of California's records, and you can see them in each of these boxes. Well depths are 100 feet to 500 feet, maybe a little bit more in some cases. I see one at 600, one at 700. So we did collect that information following the public comment. Okay, wrap up here. So the draft GSP will expand on what we know about domestic well use serving disadvantaged communities, outreach. The GSP already has a plan to do outreach to domestic well owners, whether or not they're considered a disadvantaged community or not. And that outreach is designed to seek volunteerism, to allow their wells to be sampled so we can begin to develop a water quality database of domestic wells. And the implementation budget includes money, includes funds for the GSA to pick up that sampling cost. And similarly with water level monitoring. And again, we will continue to keep our eye out for future domestic wells within disadvantaged communities. So we'll just make sure to continue the outreach to disadvantaged communities as we go forward. All right, we had a comment from California Department of Fish and Wildlife regarding a conservation easement. The department has worked hard for many, many years to develop conservation easements in the river system, and they would like it shown on figure 3-3 of the GSP. Okay, we can do that. The conservation easements were put in place over time as development took place in the valley. A lot of those lands covered in the easements have been donated to the city of Santa Clarita. But California Department of Fish and Wildlife still holds those easements. And we have modified that figure. This is the figure. The conservation easements are in this blue color. And it is largely upstream from Interstate 5, some up San Francisco Canyon Road, and some in the South Fork of the Santa Clara River. So that's the current status of the conservation easements developed by California Department of Fish and Wildlife. Subsidence, we talked about this last time. Key themes, has it been studied? Has it not been studied? What are you doing in the future? There is data out there. There's 100+ survey benchmarks in the valley, probably more, maintained by LA County Department of Public Works. And the department collects elevation data from those survey points roughly every 7 years, dating back to 1978. We looked at this data very carefully, and as I reported to your board last time, the average long-term rates based on that county benchmark data are on the order of 0.001 foot per year. So it's very small. Why is that? Well, there may be a number of cases, but certainly we have a tectonically active basin. These values, again, are very small. There is no clear evidence of land subsidence caused by groundwater extraction. And as the GSP describes, future monitoring does need to be done, and it will be done, and it's in the implementation plan. And it includes monitoring a number of these county benchmark elevations annually, twice a year in the spring and fall. So the reason we want to begin there is because spring and fall ground surface elevations, depending on what the data show, if the data show fluctuations between spring and fall, that may be an indication that there is some elastic movement of the land surface due to water levels. That's not uncommon, that's normal. So we want to get going with that. Now, that wraps up the comments submitted at a high level. There are some other things cooking, though, in terms of GSP revisions that we want to make sure your board is aware of. Section 7, we're going to include additional description on implementation of the benchmark monitoring. Section 8, we identified a consistency problem. In the document, we talk about flowing water and we talk about pools. We neglected to include pools on that second bullet on page 842. We also know from a field survey that our biologists recently did that though we've been very focused on unarmored three-spine stickleback, there are other fish there. There are other native fish there. And so we're going to mention that in the plan as well. And we also have a thread that's not very long in the draft GSP about consulting landowners. We need to pull that thread out a little bit more in the GSP. And so the revised red line will be a little bit more clear about landowner consultation. Section 9.6 of the GSP has a discussion about other groundwater management actions and projects. These are things that the GSA should encourage. We spent a lot of time looking at the Bouquet Canyon issue, and Dirk Marks had a great idea. He said, we really should include a discussion about support of Bouquet Canyon Creek restoration in the GSA or the GSP. So we plan to do that. Section 10, GSP implementation. We've had a lot of deliberations about the GDE monitoring process and how many times we plan to send a biologist in the field. And what we've realized is we probably need to up the budget item for that to make sure we have enough funding to have biologists go in the field more. So we're evaluating budget implications to that. But the bottom line is we've realized we may send biologists out multiple times a year in the same location. And so we want to make sure the budget reflects that. So you may see changes in the next budget when we deliver the final GSP for your board's consideration. Oh, Kathy, this is another great slide that Kathy put together. Can you walk us through this one, Kathy, or Tara?
Sure. It reflects all of the same steps that we took for today's meeting. This one is for the January 3rd meeting with the time frame plugged in as to when those items will actually be launched. Because of the holiday season, we're going to do some earlier and some more than once. But typically best practices are that you're going to get most of your participation and awareness just in that week leading up to it. So that's why it's focused on the week of December 28th. Anything else to add on that, Tara?
I just wanted to remind everyone that the website has also been updated. So that language, so when you land on the homepage currently, it talks about both today's meeting and the public hearing. So if you were to ever just go to scvgsa.org, you can see that right away. And then it also still includes information on how to leave comment and the plan and all of that stuff.
Great. Thank you. And we're at the end of the presentation. You can see our recommendation. It was like last time. We'd like to get your board's direction and preparation of the final draft. And that concludes my presentation, President Natoli.
Thank you, Mr. Viergoots, Ms. Martin, and Ms. Bravo. Good to see you again, Ms. Bravo. Are there questions or comments from members of the board? Don't see any. Secretary Kang, do we have anyone signed up for public comment on this?
Yes, we do have public comment. Ms. Faulkner, whenever you're ready, you may begin your public comment.
Thank you, and thank you for your indulgence in letting me speak to this particular agenda item. I'm a little bit concerned about when the notices are going out. I know that a lot of people are out of town over the holidays. I was hoping that maybe we could get the notices out maybe before the holidays so people had a chance to review it and make their make any documentation or get their thoughts in order before the January 3rd meeting. That's a terrible time of the year to really to be doing something like this. But I know that the agency likes to do things when people aren't looking. So this is another one of those, and in my opinion, this is another one of those instances. So is it possible to get it together and get it out a little sooner? Like I said, terrible time of the year for this. I'd like to see it be a little bit more interactive and inclusive of public comment. So that's what I have to say about that. And I guess I'm just a little, I don't know if amused is the right word, that Mr. Adkins tries to take a swipe at me every time he gets on the mic. I at this point, I guess I am a little amused. It was annoying before, but now it's just kind of so obvious. It's laughable. So that's all I really have to say. Just, try to be better, try to get more people involved, try to be more inclusive of the public, and let's get those comments in so it doesn't look like we're trying to do this at a very opportune or inopportune time of the year, depending on how you look at it. Thanks. That's it.
Thank you, Ms. Fortner. Director Atkins.
I'd simply like to remind the public that we meet on Mondays, the first of each month at 2:30. And we're not doing anything out of a stated meeting. Thank you.
I don't think today is a Monday. That's the third meeting of the month. So we often have these special meetings at other times. But yes, our regularly scheduled meetings are the third Mondays. Do we have other comments from the board? And seeing none, I'm sorry, Secretary Kang, is there anyone else for public comment?
There is no other public comment.
Right, thank you. I also had that same question as Ms. Fortner brought up about the notices going out less than a week before the meeting. So, and especially since we've been having special meetings at other times, people may not assume that we'll be meeting on the 3rd, or they may not have been paying attention. Is it possible, Ms. Martin and Ms. Bravo, is it possible to get those notices out maybe the 14th or the 15th of December?
Rick, can you open up the final slide again? Because I feel like people are not looking at the dates of everything, just for, and also as a reminder, the notices for this meeting went out on November 4th. So just as that, so there's definitely been a lot of gap in terms of that piece of it. But the final, what we didn't want to do is remind people before the holidays only. So if you notice that December 13th is the first time it goes out, and that goes out as an e-blast. So that is the first notice. It's welcome to be shared everywhere at any time. But if we do it too far away from the meeting, then people will forget about it during the holidays and then won't necessarily come back, which is why we planned it to be a little bit closer in terms of the big push. So there's an earlier notification and then a last minute push to really try and get people to come to this meeting on the 3rd.
I could add that.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Ms. Martin.
Just one thing to build on that. The e-blast is that group of stakeholders that have specifically asked to be notified. Plus it'll be in our general water currents that goes to all of our customers. And that's really our primary source for getting the word out, our reach on social media and even our digital ads. It gets a lot of eyes on it, but not necessarily a lot of click-throughs. So that's why we do have that as the first thing that goes out and the earliest. I think that's probably our best outreach method.
But might it be possible also on our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and website pages to make that earlier?
It's actually currently on the website.
Yeah, it's already there.
For January 3rd?
For January 3rd, right now, if you went to the website, right now, on the website.
Yay, okay, very good, thank you. And if there are others other than stakeholders, if there's anyone who's just ever asked to be notified or has commented on the GSP, it might be nice if they're not already included in that e-blast to include them in the e-blast as well.
Absolutely.
Yes, we can do that.
All right, great, thank you. Any other comments from the board? All right, seeing none, I think overall we're satisfied with the direction that you're taking, Mr. Viragutz, and other than a few little tweaks here that have already been discussed, I don't know that we have a recommendation for you to make any changes. So
Okay.
keep on.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We're moving on to item 4.3, designation of the GSA board voting delegate for the Association of California Water Agency election for the 2022-2023 term. And for this, I'll turn to Mr. Cole.
Thank you, President Natoli, members of the board. Just a real brief presentation. As many of you probably know, and some may not know, Our Santa Clarita Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency has insurance. We acquire that insurance through the Association of California Water Agencies Joint Powers Insurance Authority. As part of that, we have a membership to the Association of California Water Agencies. And so as part of that engagement with that association, we have the ability as the Groundwater Sustainability Agency to vote for their president and vice president. And that's what this recommendation would accomplish. So the recommendation is that your board consider appointing Director Martin as the voting delegate and Director Cooper as the alternate voting delegate for the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. And that is with the recommendation of voting for the Associated California Water Agencies nominating committee recommended slate of Pam Tobin for president and Kathy Green for vice president. So with that, I'll conclude the presentation. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Director Atkins, please proceed. Problems again, Director Atkins, with the buffer.
Gladback moves.
There we go.
Friedman seconds.
Well, we have Director Atkins was trying to make some comments.
Well, I think he was trying to make a motion too, so.
Is that what it was?
I don't know. I can't read his mind, but I mean.
Second.
Oh, okay. Looks like we have a couple of first motions and a couple of second motions. Secretary Kang, do you need any clarification?
I have Director Gladback and second by Director Ridman.
All right, we should open this up first of all if there is any public comment. I don't see any other comments by the board. Are there any public comments on this voting item?
There is no public comment.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All right, Secretary Kang, will you please call the roll?
When I call your name, please state your vote. Director Atkins? I'm going to take it as a yes. Director Cooper?
Yes.
Director Gibbs?
He had to go off. He had a legislative committee meeting.
Okay, thank you. Director Gladback?
Yes.
Director Martin?
Yes.
Director Ridman?
Yes.
And President Natoli?
Aye.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We're moving on to item 4.4. Mr. Viergoots, authorize a letter of support for the Santa Clarita Valley Agency's Saugus 3 and 4 wells project grant application. Please proceed.
Thank you, President Natoli. The letter is fairly brief and self-explanatory, but it's a request to your board that it provide a letter in support of a grant application for Saugus wells 3 and 4. The reason that we're talking to your board about it is we think a letter from the GSA would be very helpful, and two, just to make sure your board understands that these wells are already within the pumping plan that the GSA utilizes, and so it's important that we can get support getting these wells installed. And with that, I ask your board for its consideration, and that concludes my presentation.
All right, thank you. Is there any discussion or any questions by the board? Director Martin.
Thank you, President Natoli. I'd like to move approval of the staff recommendation.
Seconded, Director Cooper.
Right, and is there any public comment on this item, Secretary Kang?
There is no public comment.
All right, with that, we have a motion and a second. If there is no further discussion, Secretary Kang, please call the roll.
Director Cooper, oh, sorry. When I call your name, please state your vote. Director Cooper?
Yes.
Director Gibbs is not with us. Director Gladback?
Yeah, yes.
Director Martin?
Yes.
Director Widman,
Yes.
Director Atkins,
Yes.
President
Yes.
Natoli.
Aye.
Thank you. Item 4.4 is approved.
All right, very good. Thank you. Next, are there requests from any members of the board for future agenda items? Does anybody have any requests?
I would love to hear more about Bouquet Creek the next time staff is ready to present.
From Director Atkins. All right, so there's a request for more on Bouquet Creek. Seeing nothing else, Ms. Kang, if you could confirm with me, our next meeting is scheduled for January 3rd, 2022.
That is correct.
All right. I want to wish everyone a very happy Thanksgiving. Thank you all for your involvement with the GSA from every walk of life here in the Santa Clarita Valley and the Los Angeles Basin. I hope everyone has a wonderful Thanksgiving and a very Merry Christmas and happy holidays. With that, the Santa Clarita Valley GSA is adjourned to 3 January 2022. Thank you, everybody. And thank you again, Ms. Kang. We couldn't do this without you.
Happy
Thank you
holidays,
all.
everyone.
Happy
Thank you.
Thanksgiving.
Thank you, Gina, and happy
Hey.
holidays to you as well.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays
Bye,
and welcome,
Brad.
David.